She was done. She had put her name on it. Then he picked up the papers. He read them once. He looked at her once. Then he did something no one expected. He tore the annulment papers in half before the ink was dry. She was done. She had put her name on it. Then he picked up the papers. And now those torn pieces drift across the surface of a mahogany desk like leaves settling after a storm nobody saw coming. And if you want to understand why a man who controls 11,000 pounds a year just ripped apart the one document that bound him to the woman standing across from him, if you want to understand the look on his face when he did it, something between fury and a grief so old it has forgotten its own name, then we need to go back 6 months, to a deathbed promise and a marriage that began as arithmetic and ended as something neither of them had the vocabulary for yet. 6 months earlier, the old Duke of Ashworth was dying in a bed that cost more than most families earn in a decade, and he was spending his last hours not on prayers or farewells, but on the settling of a debt. The debt was this: 40 years before, a country gentleman named Thomas Blackwood had pulled a drowning boy from the River Wye at considerable risk to his own neck, and that boy had grown up to become the 5th Duke of Ashworth, and the 5th Duke of Ashworth had never forgotten the weight of the current or the hand that hauled him out of it. Thomas Blackwood had died penniless and proud 4 years prior. He left behind a daughter. The old Duke, coughing blood into linen that cost 6 shillings a yard, summoned his son Edmund, then a soldier posted abroad, a man who had seen 3 campaigns and trusted approximately no one, by letter. The letter contained a single request, dressed as a command. Marry the Blackwood girl. Give her the protection of the name. I owe her father my life, and I have left it too late to repay him any other way. Edmund, who had not been home in 2 years, who carried his father's signet ring in a leather pouch against his chest because wearing it felt like a shackle, who had learned in the ugliest possible fashion that people who claim to love you will sell you for the price of a commission. Edmund wrote back a single line: "It will be done." The old Duke died 11 days later. The promise survived him. Now, Eleanor. While dukes were dying and soldiers were making promises across oceans, Eleanor Blackwood was keeping bees. She had spent 4 years since her father's death in a crumbling cottage outside Hereford, and she had turned that crumbling cottage into something that functioned. Not flourished, functioned. There is a difference, and Eleanor knew it intimately. She kept 7 hives in the orchard behind the house, and those hives produced honey she sold at market and wax she rendered into candles at the kitchen table. She sewed gowns for neighbors at 3 shillings apiece, her brass thimble worn smooth on the pad from years of use, always in the left pocket of her dove-gray wool dress when it wasn't on her finger. She taught 3 local women their letters for pennies. Women, not girls, because Eleanor Blackwood believed that the inability to read your own lease was a form of captivity, and she would not abide captivity in any shape. She owed nothing. She owned almost nothing. And she answered to no living soul on earth. The narrator wants you to understand something about that. Eleanor was not waiting. She was not enduring her poverty as a temporary condition to be rescued from. She had built a life, small, hard, complete, and that life was hers. Her shoulders were level and square when she walked to market. Her chin was lifted when she counted her coins. The loose wisps of dark chestnut hair at her temples caught the wind, and she did not push them back because her hands were full of honeycomb and purpose. She was sufficient. Remember that word. It matters later.
The proxy marriage was conducted on a grey Tuesday in March.
Edmund, still abroad, sent his solicitor cousin, Gilbert Price, to stand in his place at the church. Eleanor signed the register, wearing her father's old coat over her plain white linen collar because it was the warmest thing she owned, and the church was cold. She understood the arrangement. She would live at Ashworth Park. She would manage what needed managing. The Duke would return when he returned. It was not a love match. It was barely a match at all. It was a dead man's arithmetic. One life saved, one debt owed, one daughter provided for. The ledger balanced and closed. Gilbert Price smiled through every minute of it. Here is what you need to know about Gilbert Price. He is 5 feet 9 inches of soft-middled, sandy-haired, close-eyed helpfulness, and every inch of it is a performance. He stood beside Eleanor at the register, with his slender brass pocket watch turning over and over between his pale fingers, and when the ceremony was done, he offered her his arm with the solicitous forward lean of a man who wants you to feel how generous he is being. Then he walked her through Ashworth Park. And what he did next, well, it looked like a tour, it sounded like a tour, but it was a measurement. He walked her through 40 rooms, and he priced every single one. That painting, he said, pointing to a portrait in the long gallery, was valued at £600. This carpet was imported from Persia at a cost of 90. The silver in the dining room alone, and here he paused, smiling that wide, pleasant smile beneath his sparse, blonde brows, the faint birthmark on his neck just visible above his striped cream and gold cravat. The silver alone is worth more than your father's house and land together. £11,000 a year, Mrs. Ashworth. That is what this estate produces. He let the number sit there, like a weight placed on her chest. Eleanor listened to every word. She thanked him for the tour. Then she asked where the kitchen garden was. That question, plain, unhurried, unimpressed, was the first crack in Gilbert Price's smile, and he did not yet know it would be the last expression he could trust on his own face. She found the kitchen garden behind the east wing. She found Ashworth Park itself in a state of elegant decay. 40 rooms, half of them shut, the staff halved and demoralized, the garden wall crumbling at its southern corner, and in the orchard beyond, a row of hives standing silent and dead, their colonies long collapsed, their frames black with old wax and neglect. Eleanor Blackwood stood alone among the bare beds and the broken cold frames, her grey-green eyes steady beneath straight dark brows, and she rolled up her sleeves to the elbow. The house would not save itself. She had never waited for anyone to save anything. Eleanor has been at Ashworth Park for 2 months, and she has rebuilt it from the kitchen outward, not as a duchess, but as a woman who cannot abide a broken thing left broken. The kitchen garden gate had hung on one hinge since before she arrived, swinging open in every wind like a drunk leaning on a lamppost. She fixed it herself, found the iron pin in the shed, heated it over the forge Thomas kept barely alive behind the carriage house, hammered it straight, and rehung the gate on a Tuesday morning while the frost was still white on the ground. Nobody asked her to. Nobody watched. The gate simply stopped swinging, and that was that. The beehives came next, 3 skeps rotting in the orchard, abandoned when the last beekeeper left 2 years prior, and Eleanor, who had kept bees since she was 19, who understood their moods better than she understood most people, spotted a wild swarm clustered in the crook of an old pear tree, and talked them down into a fresh skep she'd woven herself from rye straw. She spent 9 hours on it. Her hands were swollen for 3 days. She did not complain, because complaining requires an audience, and Eleanor Blackwood had never performed a single thing in her life. The servant's livery she mended by candlelight, her brass thimble catching the flame each time she pushed the needle through. The estate books she spread across the kitchen table and rebuilt line by line because Gilbert Price, that smiling, soft-bellied son of a bitch, had left them in a state of deliberate chaos. Columns transposed, figures rounded in directions that always favored his own accounting. £4 11 shillings unaccounted for in October alone. Eleanor found every missing penny the way a surgeon finds a bullet, patiently, precisely, and with the certain knowledge that someone had put it there on purpose. She spent £4 of her own money, earned by sewing and teaching and scraping, on a new coal scuttle and fuel for Mrs. Fenton's room, because the housekeeper had been rationing herself to a single scuttle per day through a November that would freeze the marrow in a stone. Mrs. Fenton protested. Eleanor set the scuttle beside the grate and said, "You will be warm, or I will be angry, and I promise you the second is worse." Mrs. Fenton was warm after that. Thomas, the one remaining footman, a man of 53 years who had served this house since he was 20, began laying the fires without being asked, began polishing silver that hadn't been touched in a year, began standing a little straighter when Eleanor walked through a room. Not because she was the Duchess, because she did not ask him to do anything she would not do herself. That is the rarest currency in any great house, and the staff recognized it the way starving people recognize bread. Then Lady Marguerite arrived. She came in a hired carriage on a Thursday, wrapped in 3 shawls, cream and gray wool layered over deep plum silk, with an ebony cane topped by an ivory fist clutched in her right hand, and 82 years of undiluted opinion behind those pale blue eyes. She did not knock. She walked through the front door as though she had built it, sat in the best chair in the drawing room without being invited, and announced to the heir that she had come to inspect the creature her great-nephew had married by letter. She watched Eleanor for 2 days, said almost nothing, sat in that chair with her tortoiseshell combs catching the light and her beauty mark like a period at the end of a sentence no one else could read. On the 3rd morning, she struck. "What do you intend to do?" Lady Marguerite said, her cane planted between her slippered feet. "With £11,000 a year." Eleanor's gray-green eyes did not waver. The loose wisps at her temples stirred in the draught from the hall, and her hands, folded, always folded unless occupied, remained exactly where they were. "Nothing," she said. "It is the Duke's money, not mine. I have never spent £1 I did not earn." Lady Marguerite said nothing, but something shifted behind those sharp, pale eyes, something that had been testing the weight of a door and found it heavier than expected. The narrator will tell you this. The old woman had come to Ashworth Park expecting a fortune hunter, a fool, or a coward. She had not expected a woman who meant what she said. It unsettled her. She was not accustomed to being unsettled, and she rather liked it. Price came back 4 days later. Of course he did. He arrived with fresh account books under his arm and that wide, pleasant smile spread across his round face like butter on bread nobody ordered. The birthmark on his neck sat just above his collar, and his brass pocket watch turned over and over in his soft fingers while he explained, so reasonably, so helpfully, with such patient condescension, that Eleanor really ought to sign over management of the household funds to him. He was, after all, the family's man of business. He understood these matters.
Surely she did not want to trouble herself. "The Duke may not come home at all," Price said, And the smile did not waver, not even a little, because that is what makes a man like Price dangerous. The cruelty is always delivered at room temperature. Wouldn't you rather have a friend who understands money? A woman in your position? Well, one does need friends. A woman in your position. Let that land. Let it sit in your chest the way it sat in that room. Eleanor thanked him for his concern. She showed him the door. She did both with the same level shoulders, the same lifted chin, the same absolute refusal to be made into a thing that needs minding. Price left. His smile held all the way to his carriage. That is the most frightening thing about him. Near midnight, November rain hammering the windows, a knock came at the kitchen door. An old man stood there, a former groom of Ashworth Park, turned out years ago, soaked through, shaking. Eleanor brought him in without a word, fed him bread and broth, dried his coat by the fire, gave him the empty room above the stables. She did this without audience, without ceremony, without knowing that at that exact moment a coach was pulling through the gate. A coach arrives unannounced at dusk, and the man who steps out is tall, silent, and looks at the mended garden wall as though he has never seen the house before. Edmund has come home, and Eleanor is elbow-deep in beeswax in the scullery, and neither of them is ready. Edmund Ashworth walks into his own house like a man entering a stranger's, because the house he left and the house Eleanor has made are not the same place. And here is what you need to understand about Edmund before another word passes between them. Before the war, before the silence, before the decade of frozen courtesy he has worn like armor, there was a woman. Not Eleanor, another woman entirely. One whose name the narrator will not dignify with repetition, because she used it like a calling card and discarded it like one too. She was beautiful in the way that costs money to maintain, and she wanted the title. Not the man, the title, the crest on that heavy gold signet ring he still wears on his right fourth finger. The 12,000 a year, and the house in Mayfair, and the name that opens doors in every drawing room from Bath to Edinburgh. She courted him with such precision that Edmund, who was young and not yet frozen, mistook performance for feeling. And when a viscount with 14,000 appeared, just 2,000 more, that's all it took, 2,000 damn pounds, she pivoted like a weather vane in a shifting wind and was engaged within the fortnight. She did not even tell him herself. He read it in the papers. The lesson he learned was this: everyone can be bought. The only variable is price. He called the ice discipline. He called the distance dignity. He held himself military straight, hands clasped behind his back, dark blue eyes giving nothing, that thin, firm mouth set in a line that could be mistaken for composure if you didn't know what composure was covering. He became courteous the way a locked door is courteous, perfectly finished on the outside and absolutely no one getting through. So when he steps through the kitchen corridor of Ashworth and finds Eleanor in the scullery, her dark chestnut hair escaping its low braided knot at the nape, loose wisps curling at the temples, her hands waxy to the wrist, her dove-gray wool dress spotted with propolis and smelling of honey and linseed, he expects something. Gratitude, perhaps. Deference, certainly. At the very least, curiosity about the man whose name she carries and whose face she has never seen. Eleanor looks up. Those gray-green eyes take him in, the traveling coat, the dust on his polished black boots, the signet ring, the rigid spine, and she curtsies. Once. Exactly the depth required, and not a fraction deeper. Your Grace, the accounts are on your desk, and the east wing roof wants mending. And she turns back to her beeswax. That's it. That is the entirety of the welcome the Duke of Ashworth receives, in his own house, from his own wife. No flutter, no performance, no widening of the eyes or softening of the voice. Just the accounts and the roof, delivered with the same brisk precision she might use to inform a tradesman that his invoice contained an error. Edmund stands in the doorway for 4 full seconds, which does not sound long until you are the one standing there with your mouth closed around a sentence that has nowhere to land, and then he walks away. He walks through the house, and what he finds undoes him more than the scullery did, though he will not admit this for several parts yet. The hinges on the library door no longer scream. The garden wall, the same wall he stared at from the coach as though it belonged to someone else's life, stands straight and freshly mortared. The beehives behind the kitchen garden are clean, ordered, humming with purpose. The corridor floorboard that groaned for 15 years is silent. The housekeeper's quarters, which Price had reduced to a single scuttle of coal per day, because Gilbert Price, that soft-bellied, pale-eyed, pomade-slicked excuse for a steward, believed servants should be grateful for the privilege of freezing, now have a proper grate and a full coal box. Edmund finds Mrs. Fenton in the linen room and asks, with the careful neutrality of a man who suspects the answer will cost him something, who ordered the repairs. Mrs. Fenton, who has worked this house for 23 years and knows better than to editorialize, says simply, Her Grace did them herself, my lord, with her own hands and her own £4. £4. The woman repaired a house on £4. Edmund, whose quarterly allowance from the estate is $11,000 a year, stands very still and says nothing. Then he finds Jennings. The old groom is in the stable, moving slow, mending a bridle with fingers that have done this work for half a century. Edmund recognizes him instantly. Jennings, who served his father for 50 years. Jennings, who Price turned out 6 months after the old Duke died, with no pension, no reference, and a pleasant smile while he did it. We must economize, mustn't we? Price had said, turning that slender brass pocket watch over in his soft fingers. One cannot be sentimental about these things. The man had thrown a 70-year-old groom into the road and called it fiscal responsibility. Eleanor took him back in, fed him, gave him the stable room, asked nothing. Edmund says nothing about this either. But the narrator will tell you what Edmund will not tell himself. Something cracks, very faintly. A hairline fracture in the wall he has built, no wider than a thumbnail, and he plasters over it immediately with discipline and distance and the stiff set of his shoulders. But it is there. That evening, in the parlor, he offers to increase the household budget. His voice is correct, measured, the voice of a man conducting business. Eleanor declines. He offers to hire more staff. I will hire them when the work requires it, not before. He tries once more, and you can hear the faintest edge of something that is not quite frustration and not quite bewilderment. You are the Duchess of Ashworth. You need not economize. Eleanor looks at him, shoulders level and square, chin lifted, the small brass thimble visible in her left dress pocket, her gray-green eyes holding his dark blue ones without flinching. I am a woman who keeps bees, Your Grace. I have never spent what I have not earned, and I do not intend to begin because a stranger left me his name. Every word lands like a door closing. Edmund has no answer. He leaves the room.
Lady Marguerite, watching from the hall in her deep plum silk and three-layered shawls, taps her ebony cane once on the floor, that carved ivory fist striking the wood like a period at the end of a sentence, and says to no one in particular, "Well, that is interesting. And here is where this part leaves you." Because Eleanor tells Edmund, plainly and without heat, that she did not ask for this marriage. She does not require his company, and if he wishes to leave again, she will keep the bees alive until he returns, or doesn't. And Edmund, for the first time in years, has no answer for a woman who wants nothing from him. The weeks that follow are a siege conducted in courtesy. Two people sharing a house, a name, and nothing else, circling each other like diplomats from warring nations. They take breakfast together at 8:30. Eleanor sits at the foot of the table, Edmund at the head, and between them stretches 12 feet of polished oak, and a silence so complete you could hear the butter knife settle against the dish. She mends a tablecloth by hand, not because Ashworth Park lacks tablecloths, but because this one has a tear, and a tear is a thing to be fixed, not discarded. Her gray-green eyes stay on the needle. The brass thimble catches the morning light each time her left hand rises and falls. Edmund watches this. He watches it the way a man watches a language he does not speak being written in front of him. And he cannot look away, and he cannot ask what it means. She, in turn, watches him read, or rather, she watches him hold a book open to the same page for 40 minutes without turning it, his dark blue eyes fixed on a paragraph he is not seeing, his thumb pressed hard against the spine. His signet ring, that heavy gold thing with the worn crest, glints when his hand shifts. Neither speaks of the marriage, neither speaks of the silence. The narrator wants you to understand something about this choreography. It is not coldness. It is two people who have each separately learned that needing someone is the fastest way to lose them. And they are both so damn good at not needing that they have made it into an art form. And the art is killing them both, and neither one will blink first. Then Gilbert Price arrives for his third visit, and the temperature in the house drops 10 degrees. He brings documents. He always brings documents. That's his whole thing, isn't it? Papers and pleasantries and that slender brass pocket watch turning over and over in his soft fingers like a rosary for men who worship money. This time the documents suggest that the marriage, conducted by proxy without Edmund's direct signature on the day itself, contains a procedural flaw. An annulment, Price explains, adjusting his cuffs, smoothing his cream and gold cravat, leaning forward with that solicitous posture of his. An annulment could be arranged quietly. No scandal, no difficulty. Surely, he says, turning those pale gray eyes on Eleanor with exquisite gentleness, surely she must miss her cottage, her independence, her little life.
Her little life. He says it like that. Like everything she built from wreckage. The bees, the sewing, the garden, the household run on nothing was a doll's house she was playing in until the grown-ups came home. Eleanor's face does not change, not one muscle. That firm jawline, those level shoulders, that chin lifted exactly where it always is. She asks him to leave the papers. He does, with a smile that costs nothing and means less. What Price wants, and the narrator is going to tell you plainly because Price never will, is control. He has managed the Ashworth estate accounts informally for 7 years while Edmund was abroad, and Eleanor's quiet, methodical bookkeeping has begun pulling threads he cannot afford to have pulled. That's why he wants her gone, not out of kindness, out of arithmetic. But Price is not finished. He produces a letter.
He claims Edmund wrote it from abroad. A private note, expressing his wish that the marriage be dissolved quietly, that Eleanor be compensated fairly, that the whole embarrassing arrangement simply evaporate. Price sets it on the desk, like a man laying down a winning card, that wide, pleasant mouth smiling, that birthmark on his neck just visible above the collar. Eleanor reads it. Her face does not change. She folds it, sets it on the desk, and says she will consider it. Here is what she does not say. The handwriting is wrong. She has spent weeks reading Edmund's hand in the estate ledgers, the sharp downstroke on his D's, the way his G's loop left instead of right, the particular cramped impatience of a man who writes like he's arguing with the page. This letter is close. It is careful, but it is not his. She recognized the forgery in the first line and said nothing, because Eleanor Blackwood does not play her cards for an audience. If Edmund truly wants her gone, she will go, and if the letter is forged, the forger will show his hand soon enough. Patience costs nothing. She has lived on nothing for years. Then comes the pivot, the small noise that reveals the catastrophic failure. Eleanor is reconciling 7 years of estate accounts, 7 years, hundreds of entries, columns of figures that Price kept in his own tidy hand. When the numbers stop adding up, not dramatically, not obviously, a repair to a tenant cottage roof listed at £42 when the lumber alone would cost £6. A drainage project on the South Fields billed 3 times across 3 quarters. Phantom invoices for feed never purchased. Rents collected from farms and recorded at half their actual value. Old Jennings, the steward of 50 years, turned out for so-called economy, was not turned out because the estate couldn't afford him. He was turned out because he saw the books. The total, when Eleanor finishes her count, is nearly £4,200, siphoned, stolen, bled from the Ashworth estate, one falsified entry at a time, while the tenants were squeezed and the cottage farms went dry, and a duke on the other side of the world read letters telling him everything was fine. £4,200. That is more than Eleanor would have earned in 3 lifetimes of sewing and beekeeping and teaching. Price stole it with a pen and a smile, and no one stopped him, because no one was looking. Eleanor says nothing to Edmund. She copies every figure, every discrepancy, every falsified line in her own hand. She locks the copies in her sewing box, that old thing she brought from the cottage, needles and thread bought with shillings she earned herself, and continues as though nothing has changed. Because if she tells Edmund, it becomes a duke's accusation, power against family. She wants it to become the truth, plain and undeniable, spoken by a woman the world considers nobody. Edmund, meanwhile, has begun to watch Eleanor differently. He notices she speaks to the servants by name, asks about their families. He notices she eats last. He notices the thimble. He has not named what is happening to him, but Lady Marguerite has. Her pale blue eyes sharp above her three-layered shawls, her ivory-handled cane resting against the table. "You are staring," the old woman says at dinner. "I am not," he says. "You are staring," she repeats, "and you are terrified." Good. That single word lands like a verdict from a woman who has spent 82 years watching men lie to themselves.
And that same evening, long after the house has gone quiet, Edmund finds Eleanor's old sewing box, the one she brought from the cottage, filled with needles and thread bought with shillings she earned herself, and holds it in his hands in the empty library. And the narrator tells us this is the moment the Duke begins to understand that he is not dealing with a woman who wants something from him, but with a woman who has never wanted anything from anyone, and that this is the most dangerous thing that has ever happened to him. It is Lady Marguerite who forces the crisis, not from cruelty, but from the impatience of a woman who is 82 and has no time left for men who cannot say what they mean. She finds him in the library, still holding that sewing box, and the look she gives him could strip varnish from a church pew. Her ebony cane strikes the floor once, a single sharp crack that sounds like a judge's gavel, and those pale blue eyes, bright as winter glass beneath their thin arched brows, fix on him with a kind of precision that has been making fools of powerful men since before Edmund's father was born. "That woman," Lady Marguerite says, adjusting the topmost of her three-layered shawls, with fingers spotted by age and utterly steady, "is the first honest creature to walk through this house in 30 years. And you are treating her like a problem to be managed." Edmund sets the sewing box down on the library table. His jaw tightens. That small cluster of freckles at his right temple catches the lamplight as he turns his head away from her. "The marriage was not my choice." "No." The ivory fist atop her cane gleams as she leans forward. "But what you do with it is." She lets that land. She is very good at letting things land. Has had 82 years of practice. Then she tells him the rest. That Eleanor is the only person in this house who has not lied to him, flattered him, or adjusted her posture when he enters a room. That Price has been circling the estate accounts like a dog who smells a bone left unguarded. That if Edmund lets that smiling, soft-middled solicitor drive Eleanor out, he deserves to eat dinner alone for the rest of his natural life, and she hopes the soup is cold every single evening. She leaves him with that. The beauty mark on her left cheekbone catches the candlelight as she turns, and the door closes behind her with the quiet authority of a woman who has said exactly enough and not one syllable more. So Edmund tries. Give him that much. He tries. He finds Eleanor in the garden the next morning, tending the hives she has built along the south wall. Her dove-gray wool dress is buttoned to the wrist, her dark chestnut hair drawn back into that low braided knot, a few loose wisps lifting in the breeze at her temples. She works without gloves. Her hands move among the frames with the calm surety of someone who has done this 1,000 times. And the bees, those strange, democratic, ungovernable creatures, let her. Edmund stands on the garden path with his hands clasped behind his back, military straight, the gold signet ring catching morning light, and he speaks. He speaks honestly, or what passes for honestly in a man who has not exercised that particular muscle in years. What comes out is an offer. He will settle £500 a year on her, independently, in her own name, so she need not feel dependent on the estate, so she might have her own money, her own freedom, her own— "I did not marry your money, Your Grace." Eleanor does not look up from the hive. Her gray-green eyes remain fixed on the frame in her hands. "I do not want a portion of it now." She returns to the bees. That is the whole of her answer. 11 words. A closing argument delivered without raising her voice. And the narrator must tell you what happens to Edmund's face in that moment, because Edmund himself will never speak of it. It does not harden. It does not flush with anger.
It crumbles, quietly, privately, the way a wall crumbles when the mortar has been kniped for years, and one small vibration finally finds the fault line. He offered the only thing he has ever known how to offer, and she refused it. And he has no idea, genuinely, completely, no idea, what else there is. He stands on the garden path for a long time after she turns away. The bees hum. The morning is mild. And the Duke of Ashworth, who commands £11,000 a year and 40 empty rooms, cannot think of a single thing to say to a woman who wants nothing from him. Which is, of course, exactly when Gilbert Price slides in. That evening, the study. Price arrives with the annulment papers already drafted, fully prepared, legally sound, requiring only 2 signatures. He has been carrying them for days, the way a man carries a knife he has already decided to use. His brass pocket watch turns over and over in his soft fingers as he speaks, and every word is reasonable, measured, pleasant. That wide mouth smiles its helpful smile. She is unhappy, Edmund. She has said as much. A lie. She misses her old life. A lie. Keeping her here, a woman of her station, her pride, her independence, it is a cruelty you are too proud to see. He adjusts his cuffs. He smooths his lapel. The birthmark on his neck, that milky tea stain above his collar, pulses faintly as he swallows. You would be doing her a kindness. Every word a lie, and every lie shaped to fit exactly into the wound Edmund already carries. The old, deep lesson that people leave, that wanting someone who can refuse you is the most dangerous kind of want. That safety means never needing what might say no. Edmund takes the papers. He does not sign them, but he leaves them on the desk, and that is almost the same thing. Eleanor finds them the following morning. She reads every line. Her hands do not tremble. Those hands that have sewn for shillings, kept bees, mended what was broken, built a life from wreckage, and answered to no one. She reads, and she understands everything. That Price drafted them. That Edmund did not refuse them. That the forged letter and the annulment are chapters of the same campaign to remove her from this house and these books and this life that was never supposed to be hers. And she understands something worse, that Edmund may genuinely believe she wants to go, because he has never in his life learned to believe that anyone would stay. Her hand finds the brass thimble in her left pocket. She holds it for a moment. Then she sets it on the desk beside the papers, sits down, and picks up the pen. Not because Price has won. He has won nothing. But because Eleanor Blackwood will not remain in a marriage where she is kept out of pity, guilt, or a dead man's promise. If Edmund wants her, he must choose her. If he does not, she will walk out with her thimble and her sewing box and her £4, and she will be sufficient, as she has always been sufficient. Her no is not a rejection of Edmund. It is a refusal to be a thing. Eleanor sits down at the desk in the study, dips the pen, and signs the annulment papers in her own steady hand. Not because she wants to leave, but because she will not stay in a house where she is wanted as a convenience, a conscience, or a curiosity, rather than as herself. And the ink is still wet when she slides the document across the desk to Edmund. Edmund walked into the study and saw the signed papers on the desk, and the woman who signed them standing at the window with her back to him, and this, right here, is the moment on which everything turns. The ink was still drying. Eleanor's signature sat on the annulment document in letters that did not waver, did not trail, did not hesitate. The hand of a woman who means what she writes. Edmund picked up the pages. He read her name.
He looked across the room at the straight line of her shoulders, the dark chestnut braid drawn into its low knot at the nape, the dove-gray wool of her dress catching the late afternoon light. She did not turn from the window. He tore the papers in half. The sound was very loud in the quiet room, louder than it had any right to be. 2 clean halves falling onto the desk like something dying. And Eleanor turned. She was not grateful. She was not relieved. She was furious. That gray-green gaze hit him like a closed door, and her voice, when it came, was the voice of a woman who has spent 6 months being wanted for every reason except the right one. "You do not get to do that," she said. "You do not get to keep me by tearing up a piece of paper. If you want me to stay, you will say why. And if the reason is your father's promise, or your guilt, or because I mended your garden wall, then I will write my name again on any document Mr. Price provides, and I will walk to my cottage before dark." That is the most important speech in this story. Not because it is the longest, or the loudest, or the most dramatic. Because it is the first time anyone has ever told Edmund Ashworth, Duke of Ashworth, that his gesture is not enough. That what he does with his hands, tearing, signing, giving, withholding, means nothing unless he can say, out loud, in plain language, why. He started composed. His spine was military straight, his hands clasped behind his back, the heavy gold signet ring catching the light on his right fourth finger. He started with the voice of a man accustomed to being obeyed. And then he broke. "Before the war," he said, steady, measured, a duke giving testimony, "there was a woman. She was beautiful, and she was clever, and she wanted the title. Not the man, the title. I did not see it until I was already gone, already bleeding in a field 3 countries away, and her letters stopped, and I understood that that she had been." His voice fractured. The dark blue eyes, deep set beneath those heavy, straight brows, went somewhere Eleanor could not follow. Then he came back. "I came home expecting to find another version of the same transaction. A wife installed by my dead father's arrangement. A woman who wanted the house, the money, the name. Instead, I found—" He stopped, started again. "Instead, I found a woman who repaired my house with her own hands, who fed a stranger at midnight without asking his name, who refused my money, who kept bees, who never once, not once, treated me as a duke rather than as a man." The 3 faint freckles on his right temple stood out against skin gone pale with the effort of saying things he had buried for years. "I tore the papers," he said, "because I am done. I am done wanting only things that cannot refuse me. You can refuse me. I am asking you not to. That is the sound of a man giving up the only power he has ever trusted, the power to want nothing that might say no. Eleanor did not fall into his arms. She did not soften. She did not weep. She stood at the window with her chin lifted and her shoulders level, the posture of someone who has taught herself never to shrink. And she said, "There is something you need to see first." She crossed to the desk. She opened her sewing box, and from beneath the neat compartments of thread and needles, she drew out 7 pages of copied accounts in her own meticulous hand. She laid them on the desk beside the torn annulment. "Your cousin has been robbing you for 7 years," she said. "Every falsified expense, every phantom repair, every shilling taken from the tenants and the staff. I have the proof. £43 in fabricated chimney work alone last winter. £11 charged for plaster that was never purchased. £309 unaccounted for across the last 4 years of ledger entries." She set the last page down. She looked at him.
"I did not tell you before because I wanted you to hear it as truth," she said. "Not as a wife buying her place with useful information." Damn. Price was summoned. He entered smiling. Of course he did. The sandy blonde hair combed neatly to one side, the pleasant wide mouth already arranging itself into helpfulness, the slender brass pocket watch turning over in his soft fingers. He saw the torn papers on the desk, and his smile widened, because Gilbert Price had always understood torn documents as opportunities for new ones. Then he saw the 7 pages of accounts. His smile died. Not all at once. It went in stages, like a candle guttering. The pale gray eyes moved from Eleanor's handwriting to Eleanor's face to Edmund's silence. And for the first time in 7 years of patient, pleasant theft, Gilbert Price had nothing to say. Edmund said very little. The evidence spoke. But Lady Marguerite, 82 years old, 5 feet 1 inch of silver-haired judgment, seated in her chair in the corner with her 3-layered shawls and her ebony cane resting against her knee, Lady Marguerite said the devastating thing. "Gilbert, dear," she said, her pale blue eyes bright and merciless beneath those thin, arched brows. "You have always been the cleverest person in every room that contained only yourself. Sadly, this room contains Eleanor." Price left the estate without the pocket watch's usual turning. His hands, for once, were still. The aftermath was not a celebration. Edmund and Eleanor sat on opposite sides of the desk with the torn papers and the account copies between them. 2 people surrounded by the evidence of fraud and feeling and 6 months of wrong assumptions. "I will not pretend the last 6 months did not happen," Eleanor said. "I am not asking you to," Edmund said. This is not yet a love story. It is the first honest conversation 2 people have ever had, and it is enough to begin. And Price, standing in the doorway of the study with his brass pocket watch in his hand, and his smile finally gone, watched Eleanor open her sewing box, produce the 7 pages of copied accounts in her own meticulous hand, and set them on the desk beside the torn annulment, and the pleasant man with the patient cruelty had just become irrelevant. The months that follow are not a fairy tale. They are a rebuilding, and rebuilding is slow and unglamorous and done one honest day at a time. The tenants are repaid.
Every shilling Gilbert Price skimmed from the Ashworth rents over 4 years, £2,340 in total by Eleanor's reckoning, and her reckoning is meticulous, is returned in person by Edmund himself, who walks from farm to farm in his polished black boots and stands in kitchens that smell of boiled turnip and tallow and says plainly that he is sorry. Not the grand, theatrical apology of a man performing contrition for an audience. The quiet, awkward apology of a man who means it and does not know how to make it sound like enough. The farms are restored, fences mended, roofs patched, drainage ditches dug where drainage ditches should have been dug 3 winters ago. Old Jennings, 71 years old and still steady as a stone wall, is given a cottage on the eastern edge of the estate, the one with the south-facing garden and the good chimney, and a pension of £30 a year, which is modest by ducal standards, and more money than Jennings has ever held in his life. He cries when Edmund tells him. Edmund, to his credit, does not look away. And Eleanor manages the books, not because she is the Duchess of Ashworth, not because Edmund has bestowed upon her the gracious privilege of involvement. She manages the books because she is the person in the house who is best at managing books, and Edmund has learned, slowly, painfully, like a man teaching himself to write with his left hand after breaking his right, to value competence over ceremony.
The estate ledger sits open on the desk in the study where the annulment was torn, and Eleanor's handwriting fills its columns now, neat and precise, each figure verified twice. The slow return of trust does not announce itself. It arrives in ordinary mornings. Edmund and Eleanor begin to speak honestly, daily, about small things. The hives need a new frame. The south wall wants repointing before the frost. The accounts show a discrepancy of 4 shillings in the grain stores. The weather will turn by Thursday. No grand declarations. No breathless confessions by candlelight. Just 2 people learning the geography of each other after the crisis has passed, when there is no drama left to hide behind, only the long ordinariness of days. Edmund brings a new scuttle of coal to the study one morning without being asked, sets it beside the hearth, says nothing. Eleanor mends the frayed cuff of his coat one evening without being asked, leaves it folded on the chair in the hall, says nothing. These are not grand gestures. They are the vocabulary of people who have decided to stay. And deciding to stay every morning when you are free to leave, that is the whole of it. The first physical contact arrives on a Tuesday in late October in the garden, beside a puddle the rain left on the gravel path. Edmund offers Eleanor his hand. That is all. His right hand, the heavy gold signet ring catching the gray afternoon light, extended without ceremony. She takes it. Her fingers close around his. The hand that signed the annulment, the hand that held the brass thimble, the hand that copied 7 pages of accounts by candlelight while the house slept. Neither lets go for 3 steps longer than necessary. The narrator will not pretend this is a small thing. After months of proximity without touching, of sitting across the same desk and walking the same corridors and standing in the same garden without so much as a sleeve brushed against a sleeve, the warmth of a palm is a revolution. They do not speak of it afterward. They do not need to. Lady Marguerite announces her departure on the 1st of November, standing in the front hall with her ebony cane planted on the flagstones and her 3 layered shawls arranged with the precision of battle standards. She is returning to Bath. Her work, she says, is complete.
She tells Eleanor, privately in the small parlor with the door closed, that she is the best thing that has happened to the Ashworth name in a century, and that if Edmund is ever foolish again, ever, Eleanor should write to her immediately, and she will return with her cane and her opinions and make his life extremely uncomfortable. She tells Edmund privately in the study with the door closed that Eleanor is not a gift he received, but a woman who chose to stay, and he should wake every morning grateful for that choice and terrified she might reconsider. Terror, Lady Marguerite says, her pale blue eyes sharp as cut glass beneath those thin, arched brows, is the only appropriate response to being loved by someone who does not need you. She leaves in a hired carriage at 10:30, tapping her cane on the floor one last time, and the house feels quieter without her, and larger, and somehow more honest. The one kiss arrives late. Late in the season, late in the evening, late in a story that has earned every second of its patience. They are in the garden by the hives Eleanor rebuilt, the same hives she kept alive on nothing when the estate had forgotten they existed. The bees are quiet in the dusk. Edmund takes Eleanor's left hand, lifts it, presses his mouth to her palm, the hand that signed the annulment, the hand that mended the wall, the hand that kept the bees alive, the hand that reached into her pocket for a brass thimble when she needed to remind herself she was real. It is not passionate. It is not desperate.
It is the kiss of two people who have earned each other through patience and honesty and the plain, stubborn refusal to pretend. The narrator tells us it is enough. It is more than enough. Years later, many years, two greying heads are bent over the estate ledger in the same study where the papers were torn. Eleanor's brass thimble sits on the desk beside Edmund's signet ring. The garden is visible through the open window, the bees humming, the wall mended so long ago, the moss has covered the new stones. What was torn was never the paper. What was torn was the assumption that love must be a transaction, that a powerful man must buy and a proud woman must be bought. What was mended was simpler. Two people in a room, choosing each other again, as they have done every morning for years, not because they must, but because they wish to. The hard years are not erased. They are simply no longer the whole of the story. The only sound is a pen moving and the bees humming beyond the open window.